By the time the Elder Scrolls 6 releases, it's going to be over 15 years since the last mainline Elder Scrolls entry.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome legendary game designer Todd Howard.
Thanks.
And most fans and the developers are eagerly anticipating hopping back into this world to finally see what's coming next. And as we see more of Starfield's developers moving on to this next Elder Scrolls game, it's an exciting time to be a fan after such a long wait. And the speculation, it's now starting to pick up quite a bit. But that also means that there's some wild speculations being thrown out there, which can be super fun. I love just getting to sit back and talk about all of the possibilities unapologetically as a fan of this franchise, being one of my favorites of all time. Though it seemed a good time to take a step back and ground ourselves and really look at what information is out there, going back to the early teaser trailer in 2018 all the way to now, to try to inform us of what exactly we can expect from the Elder Scrolls 6 in a little bit more of a grounded way. First things first, if you're here to just say that the Elder Scrolls is going to suck or Bethesda is bad, let's try to have a bit more of an adult conversation. If you enjoy Elder Scrolls, Fallout, or other RPGs like the upcoming Expanse game, for example, or The Witcher 4, consider sticking around. I would love to have you join in on the conversation and let me know what you hope to see in the Elder Scrolls 6 down in the comments. But let's get started with probably the biggest discussion point. An improved version of Creation Engine 2 is being used for Elder Scrolls 6. Many people use the engine as criticism of Bethesda games, stating that it holds them back. And while it certainly has faults using a proprietary engine, many people who echo this sentiment don't fully understand what a game engine is or what it does. Sure, it's flawed, but the Creation Engine is incredibly versatile, and one need only look at what users are able to do in the modding scene to get a better idea of that. The games such as Skyrim, released in 2011, can look far better than some modern releases, and it's fully capable of integrating the modern touches like vaulting or overhauled combat systems. Or with Starfield, we saw that finally vehicles within the Creation Engine were possible. That's not me saying that the Creation Engine is perfect, and even former developers such as Nate Perkapile have suggested that moving to a new engine can be beneficial in some ways.
Then when you're doing like this open world thing with all these things going on, like, it was very difficult to get work done sometimes. And open world games are no longer this weird fringe thing like they were back then. And Unreal 5 has been an amazing thing to work with. A lot of what was done on Starfield was trying to get all these rendering systems and animation systems sort of up to snuff, and it makes it really hard to even actually make the game.
That's all not to mention that recently Unreal has come under fire because many of the games that are using it have released poorly optimized. You can look at the recent Metal Gear Solid Delta.
So that is very much like right here, 39 frames per second, as you know, barrels are exploding, and you know, due to the fact that there is just more soldiers and assets kind of present in this particular sequence. And then they notice that underwater, when you dip into that, there's just a significant frame rate dip, where even on performance mode, it dips to the 30s.
Additionally, people are starting, as more and more games get developed on Unreal, they're starting to feel as though these games are kind of samey, which makes sense given that it's the same tech powering so many different titles. And you could look to Oblivion Remastered if you've tried that out. While it looks and plays great, it does itself take on some of that Unreal feel. And the Creation Engine 2 is continuing to improve between Starfield to the Elder Scrolls 6. For example, it's recently been shown off that Nvidia has partnered with Bethesda to incorporate AI improvements into their games.
Good friends at Bethesda Game Studios. We've been working with them for a long time, over 2 decades. In fact, they were the first game to include GPU accelerated physics in Morrowind in 2002. I worked with them on that title.
And I'm sure that this tech is going to be used in plenty of other places as well. And if you're able to enjoy a game like Skyrim or Fallout 3, Oblivion, all of which were made on different versions of Creation, then the issue is likely not the engine, but other aspects of the game. It's not perfect, but name me an engine that is. I still frequently see debates about where the Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be set, with two primary locations debated being High Rock and Hammerfell. But if we take a look at what the evidence says, the most likely situation is Hammerfell, going back to an early tease that involved a map posted on Twitter with multiple locations placed on it representing the past in Elder Scrolls Online, the present with Skyrim, and the last candle being placed directly on Hammerfell, representing the future. Fans on their own have gone as far to start scanning the boundaries of outside the borders of Skyrim. They were able to find an area in Hammerfell that looks very similar to what is in the teaser trailer for the Elder Scrolls 6, and it wasn't too long ago, which I think this is more compelling evidence, that a developer at Bethesda had accidentally left their Pinterest board public, which has now been since moved to private, not before folks were able to get plenty of screenshots. This Pinterest board had a lot of inspiration for architecture, for buildings, for environments, and clothing that are all reminiscent of what you would see in Hammerfell. Now, some of them did have a little bit more Celtic or Arthurian in nature design, which ties closer to High Rock, but I would argue that Hammerfell, like Skyrim, is a very diverse landscape with jungles. Yes, the Alakir Desert is there, but you also have coastal regions like what you would find on the Gold Coast in Cyrodiil. There's the mountainous regions that border Skyrim. So it would not be a surprise to me to see those types of environments, especially on the border of the Iliac Bay, which is across from High Rock. I could make a whole video on this subject, but the last thing I'll say is there's 9 cities in just Hammerfell alone. From a implementation standpoint and just from what makes sense, if Bethesda were try to include High Rock, this would quite literally double the amount of cities in the game. Unless these cities are entirely backdrops or fluffed or repeating content, I find it hard to imagine that Bethesda is going to incorporate 18 of them in the Elder Scrolls 6. And I would much rather have a smaller amount that are well thought out, that feel very intentional, that are interesting to wander through, than the possibility of Elder Scrolls 6 possibly repeating some of the mistakes that players had in Starfield. Timeline-wise, we can only speculate. The Elder Scrolls 6 could be set right after Skyrim. That might work. We heard some rumors and whispers that there were going to be dragons still featured in the game that would act sort of as mini-bosses. They would play a minor role. Or it could be set hundreds of years in the future, doing its time jump the way that Skyrim did to Oblivion. Ultimately, it's whatever creative direction that Bethesda wants to go in, wherever they think they could maximize their storytelling potential. I see plenty with the Red Guards fighting back against the Thalmor, the political divides between the Crowns and the Forebears, and the tensions that could arise, hearing stories about Skyrim's own rebellion passing through into Hammerfell, especially if these games ran parallel to one another. If they were at the same time, that alone could be really interesting to see. But Bethesda only knows. Castle building is another highly speculated area for the Elder Scrolls 6. The idea that you'll have a castle building or management system, part of this is because it's a natural progression of outposts and settlements that we saw in Starfield and Fallout 4, but there's also Elder Scrolls Castles and Elder Scrolls Blades, 2 mobile games where you saw yourself creating and building out a castle and a town respectively, that further lends it to settlement building and castle building being a possibility. We can't forget the Vault-Tec Workshop DLC for Fallout 4, which was directly inspired by Fallout Shelter, so Bethesda taking inspiration from their mobile games is nothing new. In my last video, I discussed how I would much rather see this type of system left out of the game at launch and potentially sold as a DLC. That would give the developers the time and the resources to really focus on the core experience of the game, then expand outward with a thoughtful and highly fleshed out castle management system. Doing too much at once is exactly how you end up with some of the issues players had with Starfield, where it's now 2 years after the launch of the game, and finally Bethesda has just talked about adding some much needed space travel overhauls. And yet for those who are hardcore fans of those systems, Todd Howard during his original design documents, wrote down for Skyrim strongholds and a fortress system where players recruited NPCs to go and live there and help build it out. We saw some elements of that with the blades during the main quest line in Skyrim. We saw it expanded with the settlement system in Fallout 4. But now I think for Elder Scrolls 6, it's very possible that Todd is going to turn around and make sure that his vision is fully realized right out the gate. Speaking of design documents, it's a good time to address the overall design philosophy that's going into the Elder Scrolls 6, which at the moment we do know very little about, but in an interview with Lex Friedman that many of you have probably seen, it was talked about how Bethesda is architecting their games to last 10 or more years from the get-go.
We do have to approach it. People are playing games for a long time. You know, Skyrim's 11 years old. Still probably our most played game. And so we don't see it slowing down. And people will probably be playing it 10 years from now also. So you have to think about, okay, people are going to play the next Elder Scrolls game for a decade, 2 decades. And that does change the way you think about how you architect it from the get-go.
I have been very vocal. I do not like this philosophy. I do not believe it's what made Skyrim or Oblivion or Fallout 3 the games that they are today, nor do I think that this philosophy in 9 out of 10 cases works. There's exceptions to every rule, but the vast majority of games, if you want to look at, for example, Game of the Year nominees and winners, they're typically single-player experiences, many of which are story-driven, that have put making a good game here and now as their first priority. If you make a good game for today and not one for 10 years from now, players will want to come back. They will want to continue to revisit this world, and that's how you get some of the incredible mods that fans have made for games like Skyrim. Things such as Legacy of the Dragonborn or Skyblivion, that's recreating the entirety of Oblivion as a remake in Skyrim's engine. Todd Howard has also said that he wants Elder Scrolls 6 to be the ultimate fantasy simulator. Between all the things we've talked about today, it sounds like that's the direction they're trying to go, but the same way Todd described Starfield as possibly the end-all be-all sci-fi game, I think I would rather Bethesda and Todd focus on making a good, solid Elder Scrolls RPG. Writing, especially recently, is a hot topic when it comes to Bethesda Game Studios games. I have more confidence, admittedly, with the Elder Scrolls 6 for a couple reasons. Among the biggest is that Elder Scrolls is an established world. Bethesda can spend more time crafting their stories, crafting quests, branching narratives, and so on, because they don't need to spend as much time trying to imagine the history of the universe, creating the lore for the entire world and the background of brand new factions, establishing the rules of the universe, its technology, the governing systems. All of these are already built and put upon phenomenal pillars from amazingly incredible world builders that you've heard before, such as Michael Kirkbride, the late Julian LaFay, and Ted Peterson. If Bethesda is looking to Starfield, it was, for the most part, praised for diving deeper into its RPG roots. And there's more work to be done there to keep expanding that foundation, but I do hope one of the key takeaways Bethesda has is we want to see more of that focus, and they continue to emphasize choice and consequence and world reactivity and branching narratives. Some other good news is that Alan Nanes has been found as the design director, one of the lead writers for the Elder Scrolls 6, and this man has been with Elder Scrolls since Morrowind. He's been there for 23 years now. His recent roles specifically involve writing Fallout 4, Kate, McCready, and he was the lead designer for Nuka World. In Starfield, he was the lead companions designer. He designed the Crimson Fleet as well as Neon. He was the creative lead for Shattered Space, and now that has led him to be the design director for the Elder Scrolls 6. Further bolstering the team news is that just recently we found out John Dombrow, who's been at BioWare for both the good as well as the bad, was hired as a senior writer at Bethesda, now working on the Elder Scrolls 6. He helped to write characters such as Garrus and Javik. He worked on Priority to Chunka in Mass Effect 3 and the Citadel DLC, and he was the lead writer for Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, he was also there for part of Dragon Age Veilguard, but left during its development. So we know he's fully capable of doing some great work. The real question is whether or not the environment at Bethesda will allow him to achieve that. Additionally, the lead writer Stephanie Zachariadis from Fallout London, which has exceptional writing quality, by the way. If you're looking for more Fallout quality and you haven't checked out Fallout London, do yourself a favor and go do that soon. But she started working as a senior writer at Bethesda as well. All that to say that this is an instance where Bethesda is listening to feedback. They're recruiting good talent. They're trying to improve their writing in their games. And it's worth mentioning, the writing has never been necessarily the focal point of Bethesda games. That's not me giving a free pass, but the world of, for example, Elder Scrolls is often more important. It's existing as a character in and of itself. And if Bethesda can nail that aspect of it, we'll likely be more forgiving. The big one on everyone's mind is release date. People point to the court documents that were released during the Microsoft FTC trial most often. And it's from those documents that I still see people saying we may expect the game as early as 2026. Because generally speaking, those court documents have been accurate and off by roughly 2 years, which would place in 2026. However, as we get further and further from the date of those documents, delays will continue to get compounded, meaning that document is less and less accurate. Starfield has already proven this in some capacity, with the original plan being a yearly expansion, and yet we didn't receive any in 2025. Any of you who are crossing your fingers for a 2026 release, I would uncross them, relax, rest for a bit. Unfortunately, we will only likely be getting the game earliest 2027, also very possible 2028, unless some major unforeseen delays do happen to take place. The game likely entered full development around 2023. Now, we do have a brief little snippet, but it did have one small paragraph that mentioned there's a playable build of the Elder Scrolls 6 that's available at Bethesda. So they have their vertical slice of the game, they're working on it, it's in full production, which means 2027, 2028, likely when we'll be getting the Elder Scrolls, which again hints to most of the team being moved on. And at the moment, of the roughly 500 developers at Bethesda Game Studios, there's likely around or over 250 of them that are currently working on the Elder Scrolls 6 in full development, which is more than the developers that worked on Fallout 76, it's worth mentioning. Todd Howard has spoken several times about how he wishes the time between releases was shorter, meaning people speculating 2028 or 2029, that's possibly further out than it actually is. But 2026, still a bit early, especially when game development is taking longer than it used to. This is the part of the video where we get more into the speculative territory, things with no evidence whatsoever, purely fan theories, but there's two I wanted to focus on in particular: sailing mechanics and AI usage in the game. We know that Bethesda can implement ships into the Elder Scrolls 6. There would need to be a lot of time and resources going into making sailing boats throughout Hammerfell satisfying and fun. You would need to develop unique encounters, both above and probably below the waters, meaning developers have less time to build or flesh out interesting locations on land, making it feel more empty. Assets would need to be made to make customizing the ship feel rewarding, meaning there's less opportunity to flesh out if Bethesda did want to prioritize some kind of a castle or settlement building system. Crew mechanics and AI, both for NPCs on board as well as enemies, would need to be worked on, meaning less time for Bethesda to consider how are we going to improve the AI for the enemies in the dungeon, so that each one, whether they're part of different bandit clans or they're just different enemy types altogether, would feel unique from one another to make combat encounters play in a more engaging way. Does sailing a ship and raiding as a pirate along the coast of Hammerfell sound cool and epic? Yes. But what's cool on paper doesn't always translate into practice, And the same goes for AI implementation. We talked before about AI being used to improve the facial animations in Elder Scrolls 6, but many look at mods created for Skyrim where you can actively talk to NPCs and they'll respond. While it's very cool conceptually, the way that people talk about it reminds me a lot of how folks talked about procedural generation before Starfield released, which at present is one of the biggest complaints with the game. Leading up to launch, it was one of the biggest things that I was against, the over-reliance of procedural generation. But more often than not, those excited for these features speak about its potential more than what it's actually capable of. Conversations that I see around AI implementation influencing dialogue and getting custom quests and so on often follow a similar pattern. I would much rather see AI used to help in the development of the game in the areas that a player can't see rather than the ones that we can.
Donir cries out, his voice cracking with the pain he cannot yet fully comprehend. Main chamber, where are we?
You answered your own question.
Get out of my wife's house this instant.
What? Dude, it's the town hall as well, to be fair. I was doing a job for her.
Vesper, please allow the visitor to depart.
A handcrafted story that's well written and well constructed with handmade dialogue allows for much more intentional storytelling that will likely resonate for more players than a canned AI response that would be produced, because it would need to be so heavily restricted to prevent it from going too far off the wall or getting something flat out wrong or maximizing its memory and saying things that either didn't happen or misinterpret what had happened, as it often does, completely taking players out of the experience. It's worth mentioning that Bethesda has already had their own AI systems in the game, procedurally generated with the Radiant quest system in Skyrim. They can continue to use similar systems to help flesh out the world and its quests to give you some things to do in between. But as soon as that becomes the focal point, you are going to see Elder Scrolls 6 suffer. Speaking on procedural generation, it's likely something that fans don't need to be as concerned with when it comes to the Elder Scrolls 6. If there's one takeaway that I'm confident Bethesda has learned from Starfield, it's that trying to do the gameplay formula that they did there will not work for an Elder Scrolls game. On top of that, it is a much smaller space, delegated to only a single region, so they're going to be able to fill that up a lot more fluidly, which is more in line with what players expect from an Elder Scrolls experience. There's a lot to be excited about for the potential of the Elder Scrolls 6, but I also understand why others might be nervous or trepidatious for this next Bethesda release. But from what we've seen so far, folks like John Dombrow joining the team shows to me that they're moving in the right direction. Question is whether or not they're going to continue going in that direction with the overall design of the game, which is something, even if they have good writing, can't necessarily fix. But that's all for me today. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.